Hi, my name is Reagan Fox. I'm a professor at Cal State Long Beach, and today I want to have a conversation with you about why it's so important for you to cogently organize your ideas whenever you're writing a paper.
I can't tell you the number of times I've sat down to read a student paper or have reviewed articles for a journal where the ideas are pretty good, but the lack of organization takes good content and makes it so murky I have no idea what point the author is trying to make. Just because your complicated way of organizing ideas makes sense to you doesn't mean that it will make sense to your audience. It's absolutely necessary for you to leave breadcrumbs for your audience so that they can find their way back home, back to the main overarching argument that you're trying to make throughout the paper.
When I was in high school, I was a public speaker, and one of my favorite events was extemporaneous speaking. It was probably the event that I had the most success in. And I wouldn't say that I had success in that event because I was particularly insightful on a content level. I just had really explicit ways of organizing my speech. So after the introduction, I would always provide a preview of the three main areas that I was going to cover in that public address. It would always be the same. I always said, first, we're going to look at the past and what the, let's say, Clinton administration has done to address the problem of drugs in public schools. Next, we'll look at what some of the administration's current policies are. We'll take a look at the status quo. And finally, we'll transition into what the administration should do in the future. Then at the start of each point, I would provide a preview of the subtopics I was about to cover. And then in the conclusion, I would review the three major areas of analysis that I just covered. Point being, it was a lot of signposting and a lot of organization. And I think I did well in that event because I always sounded super polished because, for the most part, I was delivering the same speech in terms of organization, which ended up, my explicit organization ended up eating so much time of my 7-minute speech that I just sounded really well rehearsed and like I knew what I was talking about, aside from the content portions.
I don't recommend that you become all style and no substance as I was as a high school extemper. One of the great things about becoming a scholar is that you get to meaningfully explore ideas and present them to an audience. Conversely, I don't think that you can become such a champion of your ideas that you let organization fall by the wayside. In fact, I would argue that organization is an integral way that you advance your argument. So when you're writing a more traditional research paper, I have some advice I'd like to provide in terms of organization. First, at the end of your introduction, make sure that you provide a clear and concise thesis. This thesis can sometimes be summed up in 10 words or less. Sometimes it'll take you multiple sentences, maybe even an entire paragraph. But it's important that your reader understand what the overarching argument you're going to make in the paper is. Also, at the end of an introduction, you might want to provide a preview of the main areas of your paper. This might include what you're going to be doing in your method section, your literature review, and also a preview of the 2 to 3 primary arguments you're going to make in your analysis section. Speaking of your review of theory, I recommend using your review of theory as a springboard to introduce secondary research questions. It's not enough to simply show that you're conversant in the literature that has kind of guided you through analyzing your topic a certain way. You want to make a really explicit connection between the conversation that was started before you started your study to how those conversations have informed and influenced the way that you will analyze the data or communication or whatever you'll be exploring in your analysis. So it's really clear by the time your reader is done with the review of theory what you'll be doing when you get to the analysis section. Next, for each main argument, provide a preview and a review of the subtopics that you'll be covering. And then finally, once you get to the conclusion, offer a review of the main arguments that you made in your analysis section. Now, I realize this seems like a lot of organization for a paper, but believe me, as a reader, you are so appreciative whenever an author does this, because a lot of times arguments are really nuanced and really sophisticated in a research report. And it's helpful to be reminded, okay, this is what the overarching thesis is, or this is what the main area that they're talking about right now in the analysis is, because you can become so invested in an argument that, kind of like somebody walking through the woods, if there are no breadcrumbs, if there's nothing to guide their way back home, they can get totally lost. And if you lose them as a reader, what's the point of your writing? Now, this is not a one-size-fits-all approach. I'm an autoethnographer. I use a lot of poetry and personal narrative in my work, and sometimes I take on a more creative approach. But one of the things about taking on a creative approach is that you have to find creative ways to adapt signposting, road mapping, and transitions into your writing.